All right, we are recording for our fashion editing demo. So again, when you select your photo, you want to make sure you're working on a duplicate if you can. So right-click on it, select duplicate, and then I'll make a copy of it. So that way, if whatever I do, if I mess up my edit, I realize like, oh dang, I didn't pay attention, I missed something, I can always throw that photo in the trash, go back to my original file, make a new copy, and start over, right? That's why we want to work in a non-destructive manner. So I'm going to show Camera Raw because it's very similar to Photoshop Express on the smartphone. Has a lot of the same, sliders and features. There we go. So again, what I would consider for my photo is definitely cropping your photo so your subject is centered and you have even spacing on each of the sides. A lot of you are going to be shooting, different ways in different, environments. So I just want to make sure you're paying attention. Obviously, you could shoot them centered and get it perfect while you shoot it. If you didn't do that, then you might want to consider cropping your photo. So I'm just going to go into my crop tool. And again, this is the same if I had Photoshop Express. And basically, I just want to make sure everything is pretty even. So the spacing above the head and the feet are about the same. And then the spacing on each side of her is about the same. So just kind of even spacing on each side. Once you're done, just double click on it or hit return. Or if you're using the smartphone, you just go to back to the adjustments. So then what I would consider is my exposure good, right? Depending on if you shot this indoors or outdoors, maybe you had contrasted lighting. So, think about the brightness of your photo. So definitely your exposure slider is the first place to start. You want to make sure, one, you can see the clothes well, and then two, depending on the person's skin complexion or skin tone, you want to make sure their skin tone looks like it would normally. If you shot it dark and you can barely see them, that's not good for fashion. You want to make sure, typically I would err on a little brighter side for fashion. A lot of those photos we showed on the websites were pretty bright, right? You can see the clothes well, you can see the details. If they had any logos, you could see those. You could play with the temperature. Maybe you shot it in shade or at a certain time of day or indoors, and you need to kind of add some warmth or cool it down. There's those color temperature sliders in Photoshop Express. You also got your magenta and green tint. That more comes up if you shot it like in fluorescent lights. Sometimes it has a green cast, so you'd add magenta to it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth just to make sure her skin looks good, like her actual colors of her skin. And then a little bit magenta. It's kind of on the greener side. So I'm just going to add a little tint. If you shot in an environment where, let's say you had a ton of high contrast, like a bright sunny day, you could potentially lower the contrast. When you lower the contrast, it kind of evens out the lighting. It kind of fills in the shadows and brings down the highlights a bit. So that's something to consider if you shot with super bright day. What I would definitely consider with fashion is bringing up the shadows. So when you bring up the shadows, it lets you see into the shadows better and looks like a more lower contrast but more even exposure. And typically with fashion photography, they have there's no really dark shadows. So if you shot outside in sunlight, I would definitely consider raising your shadows. And again, that slider is on Photoshop Express. I'll show that in a second. Depending on, my clothes or my subject, there are the clarity and dehaze. So doing a little reduced clarity kind of helps to soften things up just a little bit. You don't want to go too much or it looks like weird plastic. But just a little bit, around the teens. And it just kind of makes things not as rough edged or, a lot of rough textures. You want kind of smooth photos for your fashion photos. And then depending on, how much color you want, maybe you want the colors to pop. This is a black dress, so it doesn't really work. You could add some vibrance and saturation just to get the colors where you want them to. This is a little too much for her. So I'm just going to bring back the saturation a bit. So first thing, crop your photo. Second thing, think about your exposure. Definitely think about lightening the shadows, especially if you have dark shadows in your shots. You don't have really dark shadows. Think about your color temperature, maybe a little reduced clarity just to kind of soften things up, and then maybe adjusting your vibrance and saturation. After that, what we can do is clean up our photo. This one's pretty clean, but if I had stuff, I'd use the spot removal tool. And again, I'll show you what that is on the smartphone in Photoshop Express. And so if I had, major, things on the background or scuffs, or even like clean up the skin, I would use that spot removal tool to clean up those. So again, you could either do a healing or clone mode. It's the same in Photoshop Express. Because I'm working in Camera Raw and Bridge, I'm just going to open this into Photoshop and then save it out. So that way I have a good, before and after. I can see the difference. I just want to save those settings onto my photo. Just give me a second while I open the program. I'm just going to get my phone ready with my Photoshop Express. All right, so now I just need to save these onto it. So I'm just going to go File, Save As. I'm going to make sure that it's a JPEG format so I can then upload it. So make sure it's a JPEG. I already made a copy. I'm going to save it in that folder. I'm going to hit Save. Make sure my quality is good. I usually put it at 12 and then OK. So now, just going to close Photoshop so it runs a little smoother. This was my before and after, right? So I cropped it. I evened the spacing above the head, below the feet, and on the sides. Made sure she was centered. I adjusted the exposure. I made the exposure a little brighter. I lined up my shadows. I adjusted the tint and my saturation. If I had spot removal stuff, to remove, I would spot it. I also reduced the clarity just a little bit, just to kind of make everything look a little more smoother and more just not as abrasive or textury. So for the smartphone, I'm actually going to share a photo to my smartphone. So I'm just going to put this on the desktop and then share it to my phone using my AirDrop. Okay. So if I was editing in Photoshop Express, I'm just going to pick that photo. Just make sure I'm not sharing my screen. Cool. So again, I got it in Photoshop Express. So first thing, I would crop the photo. I always recommend kind of cropping first, using that little crop tool at the bottom here. It says crop. Just go, and you can actually go into basic. If you wanted to have a certain format to your crop, they got all kinds of different crops. They also have social media crops. So on Instagram, let's see where we at. So the Instagram vertical crop is the 4:5 crop. That's under the basic. Let's go to 4:5. So if you wanted to do it, you could do a 4:5. And then what I would do is just kind of reposition her so I had even spacing if you wanted to do it that way. Or you can just go back and then just going to zoom back out and then just adjust it. So what I'm going to do is just make sure it's the same kind of spacing on top and bottom. She's in the center. You got even spacing on the sides. There we go. Once you have it the way you want, I'm just going to go to my adjustments, and then I'll crop the photo. There's this new feature they're trying to sell. Just click on the little layers here to turn it off. Basically, they want to do like selective subject editing, but you got to pay for that. So if you want to keep it free, just kind of tap that off by pressing that little logo and disappear. So what I want to do in my adjustments is go under the light tab. It's right here. It says light, very faint. Just hit light. And then it gives you those options. So the first one is the exposure. So I'm just going to bring up my exposure slightly. So shadows. So it'll say shadows at the bottom. You got all these different sliders. Oops, sorry. Let's see if I can try to do this. There we go. So you got different sliders at the bottom. So I'm just gonna up my shadows a bit, and then I can go into my temperature and tint. So that's if I wanted to warm it up or cool it down, add magenta or green depending on how I shot it. I can then go into my vibrance or saturation to increase the colors. I'm just going to do my vibrance a little bit. And then the one I would use is the clarity. So the clarity slider here, I'm just going to bring it down just a smidge. So a little negative clarity. And then that's looking pretty good. So if I needed to heal anything, that's when I would go into my heal tool. Looks like a little Band-Aid. And then you just want to zoom in using 2 fingers. So 2 fingers to zoom in, and then 1 finger to actually do the healing. And so you can adjust the brush size here. You can make that brush bigger or smaller with that little slider. And so just make it kind of just bigger than the thing you're trying to remove. And so then just use 2 fingers to like move around your photo. You know, if I had something on the ground, then I would just paint it, you know, and then try to heal it off. And then once I was finished, I'm just going to go to the top, hit that little export button, and then save it to my camera roll, and I'll save that as a JPEG to your phone. So that way you could have it before and after. So really what I'm looking for, nice bright exposure, your subject's centered, you got even spacing on each side. If I was shooting this, I would definitely be shooting most of my, like especially the first 2, the front head to toe, back head to toe, vertically. So if I had a camera, I'd be shooting vertically, right? Not this way, which is horizontal. I'd be shooting vertically. And then for my other 3 photos, so my other poses or variations, you could shoot those vertically or horizontal. It just depends on, you know, what the model's doing, right? So some photos work better with, you know, horizontal or vertical shots. Like if I had a vertical pose like this, I would shoot it vertically. If I had kind of a horizontal pose, you know, I would shoot that horizontal. Just kind of think about, you know, which one where you're not leaving a ton of empty dead space, right? And so typically like this one with the portrait, I would shoot that vertically so I didn't have all this space on the sides around my subject. You know, but certain poses would work better for a horizontal shot. So let's see, any of these work? I'm just gonna go back 1 into here. So like the ones we showed last week, like this one is kind of a horizontal shape. And then this one, you know, obviously is a horizontal pose, right? They went to the ground to kind of do that. But the other ones are pretty much all vertical, right? Front head to toe, back head to toe. They're kind of more vertical poses. So it's really up to you. You know, think about the websites you shop at. You know, what type of pose, you know, what type of frames do they do vertical, horizontals? Most of them are pretty vertical, I would say in general. And so if I was doing a flat lay photo, I would definitely consider, you know, laying it out in a vertical kind of head to toe, shoot the front, shoot the back of the outfit, and then maybe do different arrangements or just really get close and then show details of that outfit. So I'm just going to stop the recording.